Hi, my name is Melvin Way, and this is not the start of a furniture series, but rather just documentation for my very first woodworking project since I last took woodshop class in 6th grade or when I was 11 years old. And back then I had started weight training very shortly thereafter, so it's been a very, very long time. So please don't take this as a how-to guide for building anything like this. I didn't even get the legs to be level or completely symmetrical. But this is a bench slash table to support honeydew melons for my honeydew germination series, of which my honeydew melons are getting larger and larger and they can't support themselves on the rails. So they need a place to sit, and this will do nicely. Now that you've seen one of the finished products, here's another one that I'm going to make. It's basically poplar wood. It's one of the cheapest woods. It's soft, even more so than pine, I think. And it's just, economical wood for a first project. I'm not going to sink my money into ironwood or something like that for a first project. So I drilled these holes with a new power drill that I bought. Likewise, I drilled holes in these poplar legs. They're 30.75 inches long. The holes aren't exactly symmetrical either. So as you can see, I didn't get them right in the center. The wood is kind of spongy and rough, but this is just the first project. And if you look here, you can see blotches or streaks of green and gray. Poplar wood has that, and it's not very uniform, so it's a lower quality wood. Here's my first power tool purchase, a DeWalt power drill. It's corded. It's affordable, and it's very, very useful piece of equipment. I don't know why I didn't buy one of these a long time ago. It would have come in handy for sure. And the second piece of equipment I bought for this project was a reciprocating saw, so I could saw the board in half and saw those poles into 30.75 inch segments. So basically you attach blades and you can use it as a manual saw, hold it with two hands. So that's a bag for the power drill. That's the bag for the reciprocating saw. Let me open that up and give you a better look. So this thing is a very useful tool too. It's more expensive, but compared to manual sawing, which is a real bear, I would definitely recommend you just spend the $100+ to get this reciprocating saw and blades. The blades were separate, as were the drill bits for the power tools. And here's a vise. I don't have a workbench where I can bolt this to, but just having this and being able to hold the poles in there and boards of wood and being able to use a reciprocating saw or drill on it was a real, labor saver. There are certain things you can't really do if you have to use one hand to hold down things. These are the wood screws that I used. They're the most robust ones that were sold. They're 3 inches long, and I decided to use the biggest, strongest screws. This is merely a ratchet set that I've had for a really long time, attached to one of the new long screw bits that came in this $20 screw bit drill bit set from DeWalt. It's pretty nice. It's got everything I need. So with this, I can screw things and use these to create bigger holes in those boards that I just showed you. And this is the ratchet set that I've had for well over 10 years. It's been so useful for various things, but I wish I had bought this other stuff earlier. I guess it's just one of those things where if you feel like you don't need to commit to it, you don't want to spend money, but I basically use this largest drill bit to create these long holes in the poles and in the boards. And I use this thing, I don't even know what it's called, to create these shallower, much wider holes. And those fit the screw heads so they can be flush with the surface. But I'm a newbie and I basically drilled too deep with this device, and I really should have only gone like very, very shallow. So it's a little bit of overkill, but everything's a learning experience at this point, and the wood was very cheap. So to get in these long 3-inch wood screws, you got to kind of eyeball things manually. Get your eyeball directly overhead with one eye and just look straight down perpendicular to the board, and just use your eye-hand coordination to ratchet in using the largest screw bit, the screw. So It takes a little bit of time. You could also use a power tool for this. I tried that too, but it's easier to make mistakes like that. Now that I've got the screw sticking out by about a centimeter on the other side, I'm going to manually twist on this table leg or bench leg. So the deal here is it's pretty easy, but as you can see, the cut surface is not perpendicular to the pole itself, which means when I stand this up right now without the screw screwed fully in, it's not perpendicular to the bench top. So what I'm going to do is basically get the screw almost all the way in, then determine the orientation I want the pole to go in. I want it to be splayed slightly outwards, all four of the legs, and then hold them in place and basically give the final ratchet spins, screws, to the screw heads and get it in. So I drilled those screw head holes too deep, the wider holes, due to lack of experience, and you can see this leg is kind of splayed to the outside, in both directions. So here's what it looks like before I've done any kind of painting. It looks nice at a distance, but you'll notice the legs aren't perfectly perpendicular and symmetrical to each other. They're not all the same length. There are places that need to be sanded that are a little bit rough. So I'm going to do some sanding, at these holes. The screws are in too deep. There are pits in some places where I bang this against various objects or from when these wooden pieces were put in that vise for sawing or drilling. So I'm going to use some fine grit sandpaper. This is actually automotive sandpaper, but I think it's like 320 grit. So basically I'm going to do some sanding right now and fix whatever I can. So I did some light sanding, and now I'm running a vacuum cleaner over this thing to get any sawdust out of those screw holes, because they're lower than everything else. Sawdust is going to accumulate there. First, I'll give this whole thing a dry wipe with microfiber cloth that I typically use to wash my car with or wipe it with. Then I'm going to do a wet run, basically spray some water on there and give it a good wipe. Then I'll let this thing dry for a few minutes and it'll be ready for painting. Okay, so I have this Olympic Maximum stain plus sealant. Before I had a bad experience with this stainer that would never dry, and I used that on the other thing. I got this cheap foam brush. I've already used it before on the other one, and a brush. These can be easily cleaned off with warm water and soap. So you just take this cheap 79-cent foam brush. I actually prefer these over regular hair brushes. Get a more even application. Just kind of dab it like that. Don't dip the whole thing in, otherwise you're going to get dripping. And kind of turn it upside down so nothing drips, and just start painting. So the first few coats are going to look weird, I guess. This paint is actually a lot more orange than I thought it would be. It's sort of a redwood tone. I had two cans, one of a really cheap low-end stain and one of a polyurethane that I used to fix a dining table after I moved here, and that was horrible because it just never really dried and it has this sticky feeling whenever I run my fingers over it. But this Olympic stuff basically dries out very quickly, which is very nice. And I don't have the patience to let things dry for hours and hours or even a whole day before I apply another coat. That's just ridiculous. But for this Olympic Maximum brand, it's the highest end stuff I could find in a big box store that I went to, Lowe's. So it's pretty good. The first few applications or coats here just absorb directly into the wood very, very fast and dry out. And thus I can keep applying more and more coats and just get on with it. The cheap stain I had earlier would basically just start sticking, and it took a whole day to dry. So for the other table I sanded down about half of it and reapplied this stuff. It ended up being sort of a darker, maybe a brownish, unevenly stained thing. But it still looks very nice in its own right. At this point I still don't know how this thing is going to turn out. I hope it's not going to be kind of a bright fluorescent orange. I suppose it also depends on the color of the wood, and this wood is very yellow lightish. I'm going to take that brush I showed you earlier and just generously dip a lot of paint in there and paint into these holes. So that'll stain and seal the wood there and protect the screws from rust. So from this point on, it's just a whole lot of tedious code application, and it takes a long time actually. Although these coats dry very fast, and that saves me a lot of time since I don't have to wait between reapplications. It's just going over covering the same ground over and over again. So it takes a really long time. And it's easy to get carried away and just blow your whole weekend doing stuff like this. So I took some sage advice from a coworker who has a lot more woodworking experience. He took like maybe 5 months to build a staircase by himself. This is a labor of love, but since I'm going to have these outside and have melons resting on them, I don't need to put in a huge amount of effort to make sure every surface is finely sanded and everything is perpendicular and symmetrical, because I don't have to look at this stuff very close, and the ground itself on the balcony is uneven, and that means it's kind of a waste of effort if you make something perfectly symmetrical to go on a sloppy, uneven surface. So I know the whole thing looks really bright orange, but this is supposed to be sort of a redwood tone, and I guess if you painted a whole deck like this, it would look beautiful. It does look kind of strange because my other piece is sort of brownish at this point, or dark red. Here's the same piece outside later on at night. I took it out on the balcony to dry, so I wouldn't have to breathe in any more fumes. And it basically looks pretty nice. It's not as dark, sort of brownish as the other piece, but it all depends on the lighting. I'll have to see what it looks like during the day to get a final judgment.